Welcome back to Now. And joining me here on the program is Alex Nestor. She's an investigative fellow for Parents Defending Education. Thank you so much, Alex, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So, defendinged.org is the website, and I love going there. There's always a new resource. If I haven't been in a week or two, I find something that is very useful for my work talking about educational freedom and parents being very active and involved. And right now you're covering something that is actually it's again, it's another shock to the system to learn about our educational arenas. And this is the PDE calling on superintendents to protect US schools from cyber threats from guess who? None other than China.
Yeah, that's right. So we wrote these letters to 34 state superintendents plus the superintendent of Washington, D.C. schools after the select committee on the CCP held a hearing a couple weeks back that had some really frightening revelations about Chinese hackers trying to embed malware in a Texas electric grid or trying to disrupt our critical water infrastructure. So we wrote these letters based on that, plus our report from last summer that found that 143 school districts across the country had fostered ties with the Chinese Ministry of Education or other CCP affiliated entities. And we want to know what happened as part of these exchanges. Of course, they say it's Chinese language and culture programming, which sounds fantastic, until you realize that in some cases the Chinese government actually hand selected teachers to come into American classrooms. So we just want to know what data does China have access to about our kids? These are, big question marks that the American public deserves to have an answer to.
Yeah, and Alex, the other part about this is, with all of the things that parents are dealing with at the local level in their schools right now, the last thing you would even think, like in the outer edges of your mind, the realms of possibilities, if you had a dartboard and you had to throw darts at it and hit something that might be going on in your kid's school, the CCP spying on your kid or sending propagandists into their classroom would probably not even be on the board. It's so far out of the realm of possibility. So parents aren't aware of this. I don't really think this is what they're focused on.
Well, exactly. And again, just like other things that parents are finding in schools, whether it's anti racism or social emotional learning, these programs sound good and they might not realize how bad they can really be. I mean, again, when we're talking, oh, kids have an opportunity to learn Chinese language and Chinese culture, that sounds fantastic until you realize, hey, what's going to happen if my kid asks about Tiananmen Square or about, the current Chinese government rounding up Uyghurs into concentration camps in Xinjiang? These are big questions we don't know the answer to.
Yeah, and the big question that I want the answer to is if they respond with information that the Chinese have about us and our kids, how do we get, like, because my kids went to public school for years before they transferred into a little Christian school that was actually in the back of a church. It was like this quaint little place. It was like little classrooms. Before they went there, my kids were deeply embedded in public school. I was actually on school board, so they probably, even if the CCP got information about our district, they got information about me because I was an elected official there for almost 4 years. So how do we find out if our kids were data mined? And how do we find out if these teachers came in for these kind of guest speaker spots where they'll travel around and they're supposed to just be observing in the classroom, but you'll often find, if you talk to your kid, if they share, your child will say, oh yeah, but we were covering this chapter, and the guest teacher who was observing actually came up to the front and told us about, blah. And they don't end up telling you about it unless it was so interesting or so different. And oftentimes if they do tell you, it's months later. That's the whole thing about your kids being in public school, is you do tend to have an information lag unless you just almost bird dog it. So how do we get info on what our role was?
So that's a good question. Again, we're not, super sure of the answer of what data was collected, if any. What the Chinese government may or may not have had access to. More research needs to be done. One way parents can do that even is through filing public records requests and just asking questions of their school district. Especially if your school district is listed on our report on our website, reach out, ask questions, figure out what your specific program was in your school. That's a great start. And to your point about security, another big issue that stemmed from our report was that some of these connections happened near US military installations. So, in the same way you just mentioned, hey, do they have access to my data? Do they have access to the data of our, men and women in uniform and their families? It's really alarming. Again, there are lots of big questions here. And I think from state superintendents to district superintendents, these people who are in charge of our schools and in charge of the education that kids receive need to step up and do the research and figure out what happened here. And I think the American public really needs to hold these leaders accountable too.
Yeah, and I would just say for the part of parents, there's a huge amount of information that the school gathers about you and your family anyway. And then they have those surveys, which you have actually covered at Parents Defending Education. You've covered the surveys. This is why I just defendinged.org. I so recommend that you go there. And I apologize for you going down the rabbit hole. And an hour later, when you realize you're hungry, you realize you've just spent an hour. I already apologize in advance, but it's worth your time to go there because when they were collecting information on families, they did so under the guise of giving kids surveys about their lives. And they were able to gather reams of data from kids who are innocent and just share because they're being asked. It's like an assignment. They just want to get a good grade on the assignment, so they share. So there is information about you stored at your kid's school district. And if you want to know more, that freedom of information request that's the way to start. And then you can kind of go from there. Any other recommendation as we close out here, Alex? Thank you.
Yeah, I think public records is a great way to start. Just, simply asking the question, I think is really important. Because look, most parents actually have really good experience with their school. I think there's a Pew report that found around 70% of parents are happy with their schools. So it's okay to start at the source, to start with your kid's teacher and to go from there. And then as always, we have a tip line on our website. You can, send us a note and we can help investigate if need be.
I think that is the best option. If you run into a little bit of a brick wall, you can use Parents Defending Ed. They want to help you and they want to be able to use some of what you're going through as information for their further research in the future. So it's defendinged.org. Alex Nestor, thank you so much for coming on. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we have more Stacey Washington Now up next. You don't want to miss it. And find out more at salemnewschannel.com. And also, did you know you can get me on your smart television? Just turn your smart television on and download the Salem News Channel app. You don't want to miss anything we're doing here. We'll be right back.